All right, so I was asked to talk about egg production. And it starts with what we call a primordial oocyte. This is what a woman is born with. And these guys are arrested in prophase 1. What that means is at this point, they have double the DNA. Oops. This primordial oocyte is going to, and it's got like a little nucleus in it. This primordial oocyte is going to get surrounded by a series of cells, and these are what we call granulosa cells, and this is kind of what makes it into a follicle. And it's going to have a bunch of these little guys around it. Okay. So now it's what we'd call a primary follicle. And at this point, it can secrete estrogen. Next, what happens is that this follicle sort of, it starts to put on, I forgot to draw the last layer around this guy. It starts to put on some fluid. So you've got all those little cells around it, those granulosa cells. And then what's going to happen is that you're going to kind of get these little pockets of fluid that are filling this oocyte. So this in here is just fluid. And this is when it becomes a secondary. Okay, so now what happens with the secondary follicle is that it's going to mature even further. Now it's going to start undergoing a little bit more meiotic division. And during that meiotic division, it's going to keep going until it gets to metaphase 2. Now, what this means, remember that eggs undergo unequal division. And because of that, you end up with, inside of this sort of mature follicle, which has its own nucleus, you end up with this teeny tiny little cell, and that's that meiotic division. That's called a polar body. And the reason that those divisions happen happen so unevenly is because the cytoplasm actually supports the cytoplasm is actually going to be supporting the functions of the egg. And since it's supporting the functions of the egg, you basically are, pardon the pun, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. So you're effectively giving one egg a better chance to survive than the others. Okay, so you end up with that division, and then you end up with this follicle taking on more fluid. And when it takes on more fluid, it becomes known as now a mature follicle. This mature follicle is what is going to erupt. And when it erupts, this egg is going to come out. This eruption happens due to a rise in luteinizing hormone. I'm just going to say egg ejection. It's like an ejector seat. And it's basically going to push that egg out. And now that egg is going to end up in the fallopian tube. Okay, so the egg can go on and get fertilized. Meanwhile, don't forget that the follicle, it stays an important structure, right? The follicle is going to secrete hormones. And that hormone secretion is going to be really, really, really important because it's going to be secreting estrogen and progesterone. And the estrogen and progesterone are going to thicken that uterine lining, and they're basically going to make a landing pad for that oocyte should it get fertilized. Now, I'm anticipating some interest in the actual hormonal cycling. Here, similar to the male system, we have gonadotropin-releasing hormone, and that is going to cause the release of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone comes from the hypothalamus, and follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. So that's up in the brain. And then those are going to go down and start, in this case, to work on the ovary. So what's going to happen is the follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are going to stimulate follicular development. So they stimulate 20 or so of those follicles to develop. All right. Now, the follicles, as they develop, they're going to secrete inhibin. And this is similar to what happens as sperm develops. It secretes inhibin. Inhibin is going to inhibit follicle-stimulating hormone. So it basically says, okay, you've stimulated them to develop, they're developing, don't stimulate anymore to develop, we don't need any more. Now, in addition, what's going to happen is that the developed follicle, is going to be secreting estrogen. And that estrogen is actually going to stimulate the pituitary. And it's going to stimulate it to release more luteinizing hormone. This luteinizing hormone actually results in the follicle kind of taking on fluid. And when it surges, it's going to cause this sort of secondary surge is going to cause the egg to erupt from the follicle. So basically, once you reach a critical amount of luteinizing hormone, the egg is going to erupt from the follicle. And now you've got an egg, and then you've got this corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is what's left of the follicle. So I'm going to take this guy over here. That's now corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is secreting, it's making inhibin, inhibiting luteinizing hormone, it's making estrogen, and it's going to be making progesterone. The estrogen and progesterone are going to cause thickening of the uterine lining. That makes a landing pad for that egg should it get fertilized. Eventually, this corpus luteum is going to die, and when it dies, now the estrogen and progesterone are not going to be secreted anymore. The inhibin won't be being increased anymore, and the cycle will kind of be allowed to begin anew, where new follicles will develop because the other ones didn't get fertilized at this point.